Professor ONYEKWERE NNAJI, who is in our Enugu Center. Professor NNAJI is a professor of international law and global politics. Well, Prof, the question of terrorism and insurgency is a global one, and at some point in time, terrorism came to the shores of Nigeria, and this is one thing the country has had to grapple with in recent years. Coming out of a civil war, no victor, no vanquished, trying to forge a developed nation, and somewhere along the line, terrorism came in. How have we done? How have we handled that? Have we empathized with the authorities as they tried to put down insurgency and terrorism?
Yes, let me try to x-ray the situation from the beginning till now. Before the presence of insurgency in Nigeria, we had armed robbery and all associated crimes. But of course, we should know that there's no country that's an Eldorado. Every country has its own problems that are peculiar to the country. So for Nigeria, we have this insurgency as a new type of war. And the Civil War of 1967 to 70 was a normal war, which is bilateral in nature, if you like. Two opposing parts are fighting each other. But again, in the case of insurgency, it's an amorphous and very difficult war, which does not follow the pattern of war. And in fact, as people will like to know, there are laws governing warfare. And when these wars are fought outside the boundaries of the norms, they become disingenuous and they are no longer in line with war factor. So now, let me put it again in perspective. These insurgent groups have had their own splinter groups over time. And as much as possible, I will commend the Nigerian military and the police as being very efficient. Of course, we know the Nigerian military is the best in Africa. There's no doubt about that. And the Nigerian police has been doing very, very effectively well in this very regard. But of course, like I said before, these insurgents do not follow a pattern of warfare. They divide so many methods that they can use, or devise so many methods they use to fight this warfare, which are not in line with normal warfare. And it's difficult to stem them in their tide. So what will happen is that the indigenes or the citizens in this country should also collaborate with the military authorities and the police to tip off the police when they see anything. Like there's a common balance, police is your friend. So that means that if you have anything, if you see something, say something. But people, when they connive at these very odd things, it's difficult to stem this very tide, stymie the level of insurgency in this country. So again, let me put it again in perspective. The Nigerian military have done very well according to the information we have seen earlier on individuals, and the police also have also done very well. So, but of course, there is need to up their ante, to up their game in terms of the amorphous warfare which these insurgents have, used over time. So, like we see in the northeast and elsewhere around Nigeria, these insurgents have developed these very strategies to try to thwart the normal military, approach. But despite that, the military is doing enough to make sure that this very action is stymied in the process of development.
All right. There's an interesting angle to this all that Mr. Iziala brought up, and he was talking about the environment. Most times people talk about just the loss of territories, or which have been reclaimed by the military. They talk about loss of livelihoods, and of course, the very serious aspect of loss of lives. But he has brought up the question of the environment, and not many people have given it enough thought to say these insurgents and bandits are destroying the environment and making things worse for the future. Let's take your take. Let's have your take on that, Professor NNAJI, and then we'll come back here to Abuja and talk to Professor Kabir Yusuf.
Like I said before in my opening salvo, there is no country that is an Eldorado. Every country has its own problems. This problem may be, associated with the crimes that are, carried out in those crimes. But of course, Nigerian problem is indigenous, more or less. Because like I remember the chief of army staff said the other time, that most of these fighters are not Nigerians. So of course, that means that most of our boundaries are porous. So it goes beyond the military, the police, And in fact, it involves the immigration and the boundary authorities to make sure that we know the type of people who are entering our territories, to be sure that these people are Nigerian nationals. Because it will be very, very difficult for people who come from outside come and destroy our country. Because if you love your country, you cannot destroy it. So I believe that they should check the nationalities of these persons to be sure that these people are not Nigerians. And if at all they are, there shouldn't be enough punitive measures, which I'm sure they're already in place. But these boundaries should not be porous to allow people who are not qualified to enter our country to enter, regardless of their race and color.
Right, let's hear your views on this, and I'd like you to tie in the bit about the environment, which has been destroyed by the activities of the bandits and insurgents, and of course the fact that this has also impacted on the country's efforts to feed itself. Now, in the 60 years that we've had independence, these are some of the serious challenges we have faced. But Nigerians ask, are we doing enough to surmount these challenges?
So you see, destroying the environment, killing people, and preventing people from the activities that will help them have their livelihood. All these things, they are part of the problems that we are having with this insurgency. And I would still go back to what makes someone a good Nigerian, that will prevent the person from joining either bandits or groups of insurgents and all of that. If, for example, I am to train my kid to become a good Muslim, for example, I know precisely what to tell him. Do 1, 2, 3, and that makes you a good Muslim. If my Christian friend wants to train his kid and tell him, I need you to be a good Christian, there are precise things you need to tell the kid. Do X, Y, Z, and you're a good Christian. What if I want to train my kid and tell him, I need you to be a good Nigerian? What are those things that I need to tell my kid? That if you do X, Y, Z, you are a good Nigerian. This is what we need to arrive at. Find that out and make sure that you include that in the curriculum. Primary school, secondary school, kids become good Nigerians. They won't want to destroy the country. The problem here is that you have some people who feel marginalized in the way this country is being run, in the way things are done, and there's no way those people feeling marginalized would not want to react. And their reaction becomes bandits, it becomes insurgency, it becomes all sort of things. We have a number of development projects, development partners, and bringing fund to come and do things, and that is what they are targeting. And I think what they are doing is actually the job of the federal government. Come and find the groups in the society that are population of the country and the actual population of the people that are marginalized in the country, right? So what they are doing here is to demonstrate that this is possible, so that the government will come in and do more. So my approach when it comes to talking about insurgency is not to wait until insurgency happens and try to tame it. What you need to do is to prevent it from happening in the very beginning by carrying everyone along, right? Giving everyone that sense of belonging, that we belong to one big indivisible family that all of us love so much and cherish, that all of us want to promote, that all of us want to see it succeed, so that no one would feel left out, so that he won't come back and want to destroy it.
Yeah. What?
Okay. Oh, yeah, yes.
So what Professor is just advocating is inclusive development.
Yes.
That's just it. Because our developmental initiatives are not inclusive. It has bred poverty on a mass scale. And the consequence of poverty is plural. All kinds of things we are talking about, insurgency, banditry, and all that. That's what we are grappling with right now. We must try to carry every Nigerian along. Policies must address the needs of all segments of society and all that. Education should be taken seriously, mass education. Otherwise, we are not going to be able to live in this country.
All right. So let's look at some other aspects of it. If we recall the president's broadcast, he did talk about asking ourselves the questions, the things that we have done right. I want us to look at some of the things we've done right. There have obviously been tremendous progress, and I want to come to your area, for instance, education. When it was in 1960, I raised this question all the time. In 1960, you didn't have that many people who had access and that many educational institutions. So that is something, isn't it?
That is something if we did not look at the context, right? How many people had access to education in the 1960s and what was the population in the 1960s? How many people have access to education today and what is the population today? In the 1960s, you're talking about 40, 60 million people.
56.
And now you're talking about 200 million people. We have about 10 million out-of-school kids in the north, and you go to areas where kids are not going to school and you want to blame the parents for not sending kids to school, and then you realize that there are not even schools in the communities. Schools are not even there, are not available, right? So when we are looking at people having access to education, we also need to look at the population at the time we're talking about. We need to look at whether there are availability of schools, and even when the schools are available, whether we have qualified teachers, right, and whether we have good facility to educate those kids, right? And even after we have all those things, then we still need to come back and look at the curriculum we are teaching those kids, whether this is a curriculum that will produce a kid that can be able to live in the 21st century and be productive in the 21st century, not just making kids memorize some numbers and some words and some, that will end up making them redundant and liabilities on the system. That
has been quite interesting. 60 years ago, and perhaps we can categorize them into three at the pace of 20 years. From 1960 to 1980, the educational system were highly functional. The boarding system, particularly at the primary level, had inculcated a sort of leadership structure, togetherness, understanding, common vision, and everything has been embedded in the structure of the secondary and the primary schools. And then from 1980s down to 2000, it had started to somehow degenerate as a result of the successive governments seeing the educational system as a liability, where we had started to experience a sort of distortion on the educational system. And then from the 2000 downward, we had started experiencing the proliferation of private sector in the educational system. Upon all this, when you calculated it, as my colleague had really observed, is it the quality or the quantity that matters? Are we in position to prepare this generation in the school system to address the immediate and future challenges that we were anticipating? Or are we just emphasizing on the normatives in the educational system for us to give much more emphasis on paper qualification rather than the merit where people often struggle? I think from 1960s to 1980, we never had a case of forged results, forged certificates, and even from 1980s down to mid-1990s, we had never experienced the issues of forgery, but from the mid-1990s up to date, we started experiencing it. What was that? It was as a result of that madness that were emphasized on paper qualification apart from what the individual will be in position to do. That is one aspect of the education. And then another aspect in the educational system is when we are talking about functional education, we need to have technical schools, we need to have teachers' colleges, we need to have craft schools that will prepare the middle-class citizen. People do place emphasis on university education apart from monotechnics and polytechnics. Monotechnics and polytechnics prepare people to serve and man the middle layer of the economy. In a situation where the education at the university level is highly elitist and you train elites, and every year we are experiencing graduation of over 1 million people without corresponding job for these people to be absorbed, is going to be much more terrible and dangerous to the country. It is earlier the better that we take steps. And perhaps one of the steps that were taken by the government in addressing the issues by containing our students from going out to search for a job was to introduce entrepreneurship courses at the general studies level for the university undergraduate level, so that after their graduation, at least they were able to establish themselves, at least for them to mend before they get wherever they should be. But on the other sectors that support the education, particularly in the Northeast and in Borno State in particular, there is parallel education. That parallel education is the Sangaya school, that is the Almajiri school system. So now, the Almajiri school system have huge number of pupils and students than with the Western educational system. Successive efforts were made by the state government in persuading these children to be enrolled into primary school. Coupled with that, we had experienced insurgency. And with the insurgency, the Borno State government is now talking about more than 80,000 children that were unaccompanied, meaning these 80,000 children came to Maiduguri on their own when their communities were displaced. The state government had been building mega schools for them to be catered, for them to be trained. And in the process of the training, is it an integration between the Almajiri school system and the Western school system? Is it the 80,000 we are talking about live with the government? What about the Almajiri school system that had observed more than 300,000 unaccompanied children, that these Almajiri or Sangaya teachers were custodian of more than 300,000 children in their respective school system? What was the level of assessment by the Universal Basic Education in tandem with the Borno State Ministry of Education through the Ministry of Poverty Alleviation, Reconstruction, Resettlement, and Reintegration? So when these are harmonized, then from there we can contextualize the situation of our educational development. But overall, alhamdulillah, in Borno State, we have our own university independent, apart from the federal university. Yobe State, we had federal university, they have state university. So now, overall, in terms of structural development, universities are proliferating, private schools are coming on board, but what is more important is quality of those that are trained in these institutions, responding to the responsibilities of the circumstances on ground.
Professor Umara, thanks. And still speaking of education, some Nigerians have emphasized the need for the federal government to
Before the British imperialists arrived the shores of Nigeria in the early 19th century, Nigeria had two major types of education, basically religious in nature. In the Muslim communities in the north, Malams drilled children in the teachings of Quran and Arabic alphabets, while in the down south, Christian missionaries started primary education, which they managed according to their respective philosophies. In 1882, the colonial government brought Document Education Ordinance aimed at having total control in education. Again, in the early 20th century, the government began to build primary and secondary schools. By the time the British amalgamated Northern and Southern Protectorate in 1914, over 11 secondary schools were in operation. Although Nigeria celebrated her independence in 1960, the second half of 60s witnessed civil war that interrupted education in the eastern part of the country. Many successive governments and administrations have introduced numerous educational policies and programs to eradicate mass illiteracy. Universal free primary education, for instance, afforded many Nigerians opportunity to acquire Western education. In 1988, during General Babangida's regime, the old system of education was changed to 6334 system, which is still in use till date. All these programs were introduced to improve the quality and standard of education in the country.
Lack of funding of education has created so much trouble and so much disappointment in the educational sector. It was not like that after independence. The last time I checked, it was only 5% of the national budget that was given to education, which was horrible. UNESCO say that every country must budget 15 to 26% of their budget for education. Nigeria is not even coming very close to anything.
When you look at our standard of education, it is really going down by the day. We know that by the time in the 1960s and 70s, those who were there told us, they made us understand that if you finish primary school, you could read and write well, teach others. But today, we have graduates who cannot even defend secondary school certificate.
The State Commissioner for Education, Professor Uche Eze, assessing the sector enumerated conducive environment, provision of adequate facilities and equipment, and payment of workers' salaries as some of the efforts of government to improve the lot of education in the state.
State government has achieved a milestone in the education through the renovation of so many dilapidated classroom blocks and the construction of new ones. He has also emphasized the training and retraining of these teachers. He equipped almost all the secondary schools with computer labs.
It is the view of many that education should be given the largest chunk of budgetary allocation, as education tends to build the life wire of every nation. In Enugu, Chidinma Mado, NTA News.
Now, 60 years after independence, Nigeria has come a long way in many sectors. Of course, some have had mixed successes, and education is one such sector. Correspondent Olayinka Ojo looks at how the country's examination bodies have evolved to meet the aspirations of the citizens.
Nkwaba Linus is a visually impaired person who has been able to attain high level of education, a feat that was difficult to achieve in Nigeria in her early stage of independence.
Because I love the job, I would want to continue with it and do what is required.
That is exactly what Nigeria wants to achieve: provide education to all her citizens, irrespective of their status. This is in line with the fact that education is fundamental to the development of any nation and a catalyst for improving socio-economic well-being of the society. The education sector in Nigeria has had a checkered history, leading to what many describe as low quality.
In the 60s, the standards were high, and surprisingly, we are taught by teachers who went through what they call teachers' colleges. Curriculum was tailored to what we needed in our context. If I look at it to what is happening now, I say, where did we miss it?
Experts in the education sector have, however, agreed that the country's examination bodies have made significant improvement. It is all these that experts say shielded such bodies from feeling the heat of the COVID-19 pandemic, as ICT-driven measures came in handy and also drastically reduced sharp practices by candidates and their collaborators.
The truth of the matter is that funding mostly will always be the problem, but it shouldn't be the inhibition. It should not inhibit progress. At JAM, for example, we believe that even the government had to come to reduce the charges that we had, because we are using technology to reduce costs. And because we are using technology to reduce costs, and we are also trying to ensure efficient management of the resources.
The world is based on knowledge economy. We could deepen the application of technology to increase the competencies of assessors and increase the instruments of procedure to examine people.
21st century teaching goes beyond a teacher just standing in front of the children. The teacher is no longer seen as the sage on the stage. You are now seen as a facilitator of learning, and that's what we call technology-mediated learning.
While emphasis on acquisition of digital literary skills in the 21st century is applauded by many, the challenge of adequate funding and introduction of more innovative methods are suggested to propel the country into the path of development as it looks back at her 60 years of existence as a sovereign nation. Olayinka Ojo, NTA News.
Okay, let's return to our Maiduguri studio and speak to Ambassador Ahmed Shehu, who is Chairman, Network for Civil Society Organizations, Borno State. You've listened to a number of reports on the education sector. Surely Nigeria has made some progress and in 60 years of its independence. Yes, people point to many challenges and they talk about quality and quantity, but there is still some progress. What do you think about that?
Thank you very much. Coincidentally, I'm also educationist by profession. Actually, there are a lot of improvement from the education sector. There is a transition from the conventional method of teaching to now use of the technology to transfer the knowledge and so on. But as we all know, as we clock 60, there's a lot of things for us to celebrate. Being as a nation, despite the civil war, despite the conflict, the insurgency, we are still united in that. But for the educational sector, I think we have the record in the world of being the best planners, as we all know. But when it comes to implementation, that is where we have some challenges. Looking at this from that educational perspective, our educational planners usually you have to pin out the NERDC, Nigeria Education Research and Development Council. How many times did they sit down to now research and then come up with innovative and then ways that it can be able to impact knowledge? For instance, there is this teaching method that was exported from India. The question is, why is the electricity for us to use the ICT? That is one question. And I'm sorry, I have to also respond to the issue raised by the JAM registrar. Okay, ICT I was introduced as a means for people to write their exam JAM. Okay, how many secondary schools have this knowledge about ICT? I know of a school who were asked, okay, you're going to write exam through computer. They don't even know how to operate the computer. So what I'm trying to say is there's a lot of improvement, but we need to be strategic and be innovative. There are a lot of innovative ways we can come up with toward ensuring that we transfer this knowledge effectively, that we can be able to use the available resources at our domain for us to see that we transfer the knowledge. Even the education sector, some of the values, some of the religion aspects, some of these issues that has to do with our curriculum that can transfer the citizen, the patriotism about corruption and other things. We do it at the national and international level. Most of those government agendas need to be packaged and then introduced into our curriculum. By that, we'll be producing citizens that are very productive, that are patriotic, that are sincere in all what they are doing. Our curriculums, they teach us, for instance, I used to joke with other people about, okay, our system told us this is how to draw a frog and a label a frog, but what does a drawing of a frog add to the national economic at the end of the day? These are some pertinent questions that we really need to go back to the drawing board as we clock 60. It's no longer a rather for us to start thinking, teaching students how to do the drawing, cut the angles, Pythagoras theory. It's important at the long run, but actually the system, all the education sector need to be coordinated effectively so that we can have a comprehensive curriculum that can be able to address the needs in the country and that can be able to make the citizens to be more productive and that can be able to stand the test of time. I have to also link this issue to the youth, of which I am working closely with. Our curriculum do not factor what are the needs of the youth and what are those things that the youth need to be taught in the curriculum. At the last time I checked, I haven't seen anything. The curriculum should have aspects that will prepare the youth. My colleague here, professor, have emphasized about the issue of entrepreneurship in our universities as just a general studies. But in conventional other countries, what we needed to have is to start teaching the children from the junior secondary school level. Give them the mentoring, what do they want to become, and then all these things should be factored in the curriculum so that by the time they graduate from universities, they're going to be a top-class masterpiece of their own. That is why when you see a Nigerian youth traveling outside the country, they make it as one of the best. Why? Because the educational system did not give them the opportunity, because the environment is not leveling. You want to send a report. and there is no light in your community for 3 days. What do you do? How do you start sending? You cannot send and then take it to the NIPOS as previously. So all these factors, there are relationship between all the necessary infrastructures that we need in the country and also the educational system. Thank you.
So much, Ambassador Ahmed JEHU, Chairman, Network for Civil Society Organizations, Borno State. And at this point, we'll also say a big thank you to Professor Ibrahim Umara of the University of Maiduguri. Both of them joined us from our Maiduguri studios. We'd like to thank you for your thoughts and contributions to this program. Thank you very much, gentlemen, and please enjoy the rest of your day. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Thanks.
Back here, quite a number of things were talked about, and functional education, entrepreneurship, and like the last speaker said, you know, the curriculum and what's in there for the youths. And these are things that even other nations are still grappling with, because if you hear people talk about falling standards, it's not peculiar to Nigeria. We've heard that in the Western nations as well.
We are living in a fast-changing world, and one has to be up to speed. Just like we said at the beginning, in the 40s, 50s, 60s, education was for you to occupy a position and contribute to the engine of society, engine of government functioning. Along the line, the government said, oh, we have to reorder it, 6334, to be able to lay emphasis on technical education to meet what we saw that time as a changing world. We didn't reckon with the digital world that was coming. You know, we seem not to be well prepared, even with the ingenuity of the average Nigerian, the intellect, the skills that we have. It's a challenge, which I know that the federal government has also observed. What they call keying into the digital economy. I think there is a desk for that. We have to do that. We are now confronted with two challenges. The 10 million children out of school, completely out of school. We're not talking about the digital education this time, completely out of school. And there are other people also. We have to lay emphasis on mass education first. And now look at the curriculum. What are we teaching? Everybody cannot be a university graduate, PhD holder. Those who have decided to go up there, what incentives are there? Research is almost a dormant aspect in Nigerian development now. Without research, where are we going to go to? No emphasis on science. Can you promote science without research? With special funding for it, waiting for results? We don't have that. So we are grappling with the mass illiteracy. We are grappling with the quality of education for people who are going to contribute to development. We are now so not supporting those who have distinguished themselves and are ready to research and make findings for us. They are not supported. So at various levels, we seem not to be doing very well. And I keep questioning. We have 3 tiers of government in Nigeria. We want to find out what the local government is doing, because they would have been able to be empowered to take care of this mass education at that level. And now before the secondary, the state governments moved to the next level, and now the federal government.
Well, since you speak of the subject, let me just explore it a little further and say, you think that there's too much concentration in the center? I mean, the citizens, expect so much from the center that we're not questioning just how much the states say keen into policies, and you think there's so much attention paid to what the federal does and not what the states are doing?
So much attention to the center, so much attention even to government as a whole, and much less attention to the kids that are learning themselves. I'll give you an example. If you have a 3-year-old kid that is used to playing with your phone, for example, from time to time touching the screen, give that kid a computer. The day you give that kid a computer, the kid will try to touch the screen of that computer. That kid is already telling you that since your phone is soft touch, your computer should be so. That means there's a problem there that needs to be solved. So what am I saying here is that, look, in the past we are asking kids in the schools, what do you want to become when you grow up? That is an obsolete question. You can't ask that question anymore. Probably the kind of profession you're thinking in your mind will not longer be available when that kid is a grown-up. Now what we should be asking is, what problem do you want to solve when you grow up? so that you will have a range of options. And from that, we should be able to develop a curriculum that can be able to answer those questions that our kids have now. Look, there's a realization that we need to have. All this technology that we are seeing today, which we paid money to go and learn, and then so that we can be able to adapt to it, they are part of the culture of our kids. They are not part of knowledge. It is knowledge to us, is culture to them. They are going to grow up together with these things, and they are looking up to an opportunity to use them and solve all the problems that we might not have seen yet, right? So I think we need to kind of reduce the weight on this center. It is not about experts coming to sit down in a secluded place to craft a curriculum for kids. No, we should involve those kids. We have to be very revolutionary in the way we do this. Involve the kids, let them, give them opportunity to bring the problems that they want to solve in the future, and involve them in what you're doing.
All right, let's take another trip to Enugu studio, and we're being joined by a new guest, Mr. Igwekwe Chukwuma Igwekwe, a public affairs analyst. Thanks for joining us on this special program. Hear me clearly? Well, you've listened to so many views espoused on this program since we started. We've gone into so many aspects of it: the political, education, security. And so let me start off with you by just saying, what are your thoughts on how Nigeria has been able to pull through in many of these sectors in 60 years of its independence?
Thank you very much. I would like to start by saying that I will join those who will say that irrespective of the fact that we have not gotten to where we are, I will say that we are making progress. But be it as it may, we have to understand that one, there are a lot of some uniqueness about Nigeria as a country that we need to understand. Because one, Nigeria is the most populous black country in the whole world. You don't get any of it again in Africa. Nigeria is a multi-tribal, multi-ethnic country. Nigeria is also a country that has experienced a military rule for over close to 30 years. And when we put this thing together, it will sum up to say that it has not been easy. It has not been easy in the fact that, judging from where we started, where we received, where we were tutored by the colonial masters, and at the stage we felt we are right to take over our own matter by ourselves. And on that ground, we will say that we were working. Only God knows what they mean by that, because you can only give what you have. But you can see that between the era of military in 1966 till we finally arrived in 1999 for another democratic dispensation, you will still see that even when we are taking off from 1999, we had to also stand on the base of the military in order for us to move. The two successive administrations we have had, maybe the President Olusegun Obasanjo and the present President Buhari that is successfully doing their second tenure, they are all former military men, and you know they are fully trained military men. So you can see that even the democracy we are trying to use to judge on how far we have gone, we can't say is a pure, we can't say it's a pure democracy, because at the end of the day, people who has had military training are driving the process of the democracy, of which is what we still have now. But let me put that aside and say that one good thing is Nigeria is still one. One good thing is that Nigerians have developed hard skin. One good thing, Nigerians are determined that whatever it is, they must survive. One good thing is that if any Nigeria gets to any nation outside this Nigeria, whether under hot or under cold, that person will survive. That is why you see that the leaders, our crop of major problem is leadership problem. It is leadership problem that have fueled ethnic crisis. It is leadership problem that have made our economic policies not to work, sometimes deliberately, because I know that when the system is working, those who are benefiting will not benefit. But Nigerians are good followers. All they need is to have a good leader. How we have passed this in, we don't have another country again of our own. When you change the education system, Nigerians adapt. When you change the political terrain, Nigerians adapt. When you change other systems, Nigerians adapt. You can imagine that in Nigeria, a country that has, doused the whole world with Nollywood, we can't have Nollywood anywhere. There is no place called Nollywood. Nollywood is moving from one hotel to the other. But you go outside the country, you see what the Indians have done with their Bollywood, you see what the American has done with the Hollywood. Because of the leaders are not providing the adequate leadership. Because Nigerians are good followers. So we have been able to pass through this. We have been able to pass through this thick and thin. The conclusion was after 2015 that there will be no Nigeria. But Nigerians will still came out of it. Everywhere was heated up because our leaders know how to heat it up. Because they know they will always take our advantage of with the masses. Because they know they can always take us for granted. Whenever they want to create problem, whenever they want to have their way, they find a way of hitting the policy, and they find a way of sending us to fight against ourselves. While they sit down and share their interests to their own benefit. So it has not been easy, but I'm saying that we have made progress from where we are. We have looked at the education sector, what we inherited from the whites. We couldn't sustain it. At a time that education was doing well, the government came and said, no, we'll take it away from the missionaries. And they took it away from missionaries and tried and see whether they can handle it. At the last, it came back to the missionaries. But before it came back, it was, it can never be the same again. And
so well, in all of this, you still acknowledge that having gone through all these challenges, country still remains one, and Nigerians, you say, have developed what you call the thick skin and survival instincts. Okay, at this point in time, we'll introduce another guest that has joined us, this time from Bauchi, and he is Professor Bala Suleiman Dalhat of ATBU Bauchi. And Prof, if you can hear me, welcome to this program. Let's just hear you so we can be sure that you can hear us loud and clear. Welcome to this program, Prof.
Yeah, Mr. Siristomo. I can hear you.
Okay, fine. Now, if you've listened to the contributions of our other guests, particularly of Mr. Igbokwe, Chukuma Igbokwe, who just joined us from Enugu, he's drawn attention to one aspect of Nigeria and Nigerians. Now, there is a joke going around, and they say, look, if you searched for the meaning of the word resilience in the dictionary and open to it, you'd find that it's a Nigerian. It means a Nigerian. And despite all what Nigeria has been through, it still remains as one country. And the Nigerian people say their middle name is resilience. We'd like you to comment on 60 years of Nigeria's independence and how Nigerians have adapted to the various challenges and surmounted them.
Let me quote the former Secretary General of the United Nations, Boutros Ghali. In a comment, he said, if God should have a nationality, definitely he's a Nigerian. Why? Because Nigeria is bedeviled with so many difficulties, diversities, and disparities. Nigeria is a very wonderful country, like the last speaker have just mentioned, that we have multi-ethnic, multi-regional, multi-religious, so many adjectives you can qualify, that Nigeria is bedeviled with all these things. And when you look at even the topography, the vegetation is different, the climate is different, the culture, tradition, and everything is different. And the major distinction is the education level. When you look at the southern part of the country, is dominated in terms of education. When you come to the northern part of the country, they are only blessed with some natural resources, mostly agricultural, with high level of ignorance, with high level of poverty per se. Yet, we accommodate each other. And despite the fact that most of our elites have made several efforts to see that they have done what is called a strategy, whereby corruption has eaten off deeply into the minds of an average Nigerian leader. Everyone that comes to complain will say, our problem in Nigeria is not the resources, rather it is just the leadership. Let me also quote Ms. Condoleezza Rice. When she came into the country sometimes around 2002-03, on her way, she was at Rwanda and Uganda. And when looking at the debt profile, she used the American influence to say, we have cancelled a significant portion of your debt. And the president then requested that let's also have a debt cancellation for Nigeria. But she said, never, because Nigeria is too rich to be poor in terms of resources, but it's too poor to be rich in terms of leadership or management of the resources available. So in that regard, she did agree to cancel the debts. Now, looking at our nature in this country, we have that citizenship that everyone is allowed to live wherever he or she wishes to remain, because we are citizens of the country. Now, if you come to the north, for instance, starting from Abuja down to Maiduguri, Taraba, and what have you, go and look at the level of investments made by the people from the southern part of the country. So anybody that is trying to say, let us divide the country along whichever line is just mischievously saying it. It's not actually meaning what he wants, because there is no any criteria upon which you can divide the country, because we have all accommodated ourselves. When we have the naturally endowed resources in the southern part, and we have efforts made by the northern part of the country, whereby most of the agricultural produce that are used in feeding the whole nation, including some countries in the West African sub-region, is coming from the northern part of the country. And most of the people that are trading these commodities, they come from the eastern part of the country. The northerners normally produces, and the trading is taking place by by people from other part of the country. So we are highly accommodating each other. It is not easy to govern Nigeria, because whenever we have a leader, if he attempts to take care of his own region, people start complaining that yes, because he's this and that. Take for instance, presently, the president of the country, if he make any effort to make appointments or to develop any part of the north, or to develop any part of the north that is predominantly Muslims, even the northerners within the country will still complain that yes, he has neglected our state because we are Christian-dominated north. He doesn't have any regard for us. And we are talking about marginalization. But what we should think of is, what value is the president adding? For instance, when you say, I'm going to build up a railway line that is going to link up maybe northern part of the country to Niger Republic, it's a welcome development when you look at the international trade that is taking place between Nigeria and Niger Republic. When we are going to have a metropolitan train to ease transportation and to save our roads within the country or within our federal capital territory, it's a welcome development, but people will give it a different interpretation. So that issue of resilience, we have to be accommodating. When you go to Lagos, I know sometimes in 2019 there was a plea by some Igbos that they should be given the position of even a vice or a deputy governor in Lagos because of their population. That is to tell you that, yes, Lagos is a no man's land. It accommodates each and everybody from whatever part of the country. That is it. When we go to the north, go to the north, take for instance, on Sundays there are businesses that will cease to operate in Kano, in Sokoto, in Katsina, and in many parts of the country. Why? Because it is people from the southern part of the country that are engaged in doing these things. We are endowed with a lot of resources, natural resources, agricultural resources, which requires a little effort. Unfortunately, that issue of lack of being proactive, one of the speakers said, we are good in making policies, we are good in designing, but implementation is a problem. And that is true of the matter. Take for instance, when you come to the northern part of the country, our pride is agriculture. And when your pride is agriculture, then you should be proactive. The rainy season commences usually from April, May, and it ends in October, November. But we are now in October. Up to this moment, there are some consignments of fertilizer and other herbicides that are not yet landed in the...
Well, Professor Bala Suleiman Delhat, we'll still ask you. We'll ask you to just pause a while here. We know that when we come to talk about the economy and how we've run the finances of this country, you would have a lot to say about it. But at this point in time, let's go back to our Enugu studio and speak to both Professor JEHU ONYEKWERE NNAJI and Mr. Igbokwe Chukuma Igbokwe to sum up their thoughts briefly, in spite of all what we have talked about on this program and in all other programs, and taking a cue from what the presidential broadcast was about on the 1st of October. What are you leaving Nigeria with at 60 years of independence? If we can have your brief roundup. Let's start off with Professor ONYEKWERE NNAJI.
Yes, it's very important to note that Nigeria has come through a long way. And if we look at the time from military to the civilian regimes, we discover that military was, endemic in Nigeria for over a period of, 29 years thereabouts. And the Nigerian democracy is about 21 years. So if we look at all these, we see that the Nigerian democracy is a nascent one, which is already just trying to take shape. But of course, in this area of education, we have suffered tremendously because education is the driving tool that drives every economy. And that is why the normal knowledge or the normal maxim is that knowledge is power. How do you get this knowledge? By acquiring it, by studying. And that is why the Roman scholar Cicero said that a room without book is like a body without a soul. So if we look at all these things, Nigeria should put in perspective all the things that have to do with education to encourage the students to study well. And of course, in this era of coronavirus, we have another problem on our hands. Most of the studies will be done at distant learning process, and we do not have the facilities. Most students don't have money to buy iPad, they don't have money to buy computers or electronic gadgets. Government should subsidize some of these things because in other climes, I think these things are done properly well, and students should access bursaries because it should be a choice for not going to school. So it should be somebody's right to acquire education, not because you don't have the finance. So government should aid the students because I believe that Nigerians are the best all over the world. Because when Nigerians leave the shores of this country and go elsewhere in Europe and the United States, we have been opportunity to lecture in the universities. And in fact, Nigerians and their students are the best. So it is important that we should give them that leeway to showcase themselves properly, and we should market our potentials. And that's why I believe that Nigerians are doing well given the short period of democracy.
So very much, Professor JEHU ONYEKWERE NNAJI. And your closing thoughts, Mr. Chukuma Igbokwe, briefly.
Thank you. My closing thought is that looking at the address of the president on 1st October, it brought back hope again. But I want to say also that there need to be a follow-up because Nigerians, we are used to this, like the other person said, we are used to formulating policies, but implementing it is a problem. Each time a nationwide broadcast comes from a president like this, we celebrate it after reading it. But at the end of the day, it seems that we don't really get out these things implemented to the letter, because that is what is giving Nigerian hope. Nigerians are open, looking for when their leaders, any day their leaders get up and say, we are now ready to put things right. Nigerians are ready to follow. Nigerians are people who can forget the suffering they've had over the years and make more sacrifice. Just that they are making sacrifice over the increase in fuel pump price. Just that Nigerians also are making sacrifice in increase in electricity tariff. No matter how things are hard, Nigeria is looking for a leader that will give them leeway, that can lead the way, and we are ready to follow. Thank you.
All right. Thank you very much. Thank you to you too for joining us on this program. Thank you, and we wish you well in your other activities for the day. Thank you very much.